They had walked south from the Grote Markt to a tall, thin building with a pointed red-tiled roof in St. Andrews. It was unmarked and appeared empty. The huge door was set between a gallery that featured in its window a few sculptures made from wire, and on the other side was a shop selling maritime antiques. Neither seemed to be open. The narrow lane was still, silent, chilled by shadow in the gully formed by the steep-faced buildings on either side, and shielded from the sound of traffic by the high facades. At the moment, the family keep the Saints of Filth in here, but it often moves. Peter placed both hands upon the ancient iron door handles. He smiled at Kyle. But not by itself. Kyle followed his guide into a narrow reception with plain white walls. It was an innocuous space, clean, lit with dawn-light simulator bulbs. A smell of incense dominated. Opposite the door, a thin staircase with a black iron handrail began an ascent. Once inside, Kyle felt peculiar, dizzy, unwell now that he had left the big sky and the thoroughfare of the old town. His stomach popped and fizzed. He tried to put it down to lack of sleep. His guts jangled at the expectation of seeing something he was sure would not be good for him. "And now I am afraid I must search you," Peter said without a trace of humour. "Sorry?" "The family insist. Cameras are very small these days. Please do not take offence." "Who are these people?" Peter put his index finger against his lips. "Guardians. Their ownership is, shall we say, reluctant, but necessary. Even if you come back here, the paintings would be gone, and it's not good to look for too long. Many people who have done, they never have a good end. They go mad. When the family realized this many years ago, they took measures." He looked Kyle in the eye. "May I?" Kyle couldn't disguise feeling insulted. "Go ahead." Peter inspected the lapel of Kyle's leather jacket, his collars, belt buckle, crouched down and studied his boots. "Your bag. Leave it here." Kyle slid it off his shoulder and dropped it. Peter smiled when he was satisfied. "Good. Now I think we can go up." Peter smiled when he was satisfied. "Good. Now I think we can go up." They passed 2 floors of closed doors, 2 per floor, went up through the intense light of the stairwell to the small landing of the top floor, which no more than 2 people could stand on together. Peter entered a code into a metal panel in the door of the street-facing room, looked over his shoulder at Kyle, nodded, and then entered the room. Steel blinds covered the windows. White paint softened the walls and ceiling about an unfurnished room, its floor plain wooden boards. A quartet of aluminium stands in each corner of the room held clusters of powerful dawn-light simulators. Wires trailed from them to a multi-plug board. A concentration of their luminance upwards prevented a direct focus of the lights on the 3 wooden stands, upon which 3 large paintings were mounted. Each painting was covered with a black cloth. Behind the easels were 3 black cases, open to reveal protective velvety interiors. Peter smiled. "Come." Under their feet the floorboard groaned. "Here." He stopped Kyle about 5 feet from the stands, positioned himself between Kyle and the stands, checked his watch. "Look at the painting on the left. Do not look to your right until we are ready. I'll tell you when." Kyle nodded. The paintings were unveiled. Peter turned, then moved and stood beside Kyle and faced the triptych. "The Saints of Filth." Kyle's eyes refused to stop flicking across all 3 paintings. Each canvas was at least 4 feet across, as many high, and all dark as if sooty. Within the shadowy smears, the only details he took away were those of intense red fire in the first 2 frames, like occasional flashes. The tone of the last picture was much lighter, the colour of smoke. The first one, yes? It is called the Siege of Jerusalem. It is the beginning of the end for Conrad Loche and his blood friends, at least for a while. Kyle glanced at Peter, who nodded at the canvas. Tell me what you see. Kyle looked to the top of the first ancient wooden frame and moved his eyes downwards. Saw a thin strip of distant sky, red and black, cut above an arid plain of dry or scorched land. In the top third of the picture, beneath the angry sky, an army bristled with pikes and lances. Their steel helmets were close together, and the armoured cluster moved as one mass upon a mostly broken wall. About the rubble inside the town, a handful of men with thin legs threw their arms into the sky, or stood with drawn swords and banners. It looked like a final stand. I see the army. The siege? The besiegers. 700 soldiers, 200 mercenaries. Spanish, very disciplined, with much experience slaughtering Protestants. The walls are broken, and the soldiers are pouring into the town. Some Mayen, I'm guessing? Peter nodded. What are the people doing in the town? Horribly thin and miserable women wearing cloth caps and long gowns trailed bone-thin hounds about their skirts. All of the people's faces were depicted with hollow eye sockets. Mouths hung open and were dark inside. Round-headed children watched from the upper windows of one building. The few male figures he could see were at the collapsed walls. Only a few wore armour or clutched weapons. Hopelessly, women threw buckets of dirty water at the fires that licked out of 3 visible windows. The women are putting out fires. Yes, and they also repaired the buildings and the walls at night. The Catholic army fired cannon shot at them. The siege lasted 6 weeks. 6! The army built a trench round the town and decided to starve the blood friends. See how they all look? Nicholas Verhulst painted them as bones in rags. They have no eyes. Their jaws hang open like the dead. The royal court held the stores of food, which ran out very quickly, and the people had no bread for 6 weeks. It was forbidden to eat the dogs, so they ate the horses, they ate the rats, then they ate the grass. The unholy swine, he was all right, and the prophets elect. The royal court of God's one true king ate well, while the people starved. Loche sent sorties outside the walls, and he even destroyed the army's cannons in one skirmish. But the Catholic soldiers, they still surrounded them, starved them. Loche killed those people who tried to go over to the Guise army when the town people who were promised sanctuary if they repented. See the market square? Kyle found it. 8 headless figures in white winding sheets lay in the dirt of the square, before a figure in purple robes, who sat upon a golden throne. The seated figure looked up to heaven. Its face was greenish, its grin skeletally beatific. Apostates, Peter said, beheaded. He offered their blood to those angels he served, with whom he had a pact. You see, Loche, he looks to heaven, waits for the angels who guide him to save him as he promised his followers. But the people have no food and little water. There is disease, and many bodies fill the houses. So in the final days, Loche told them to drink the blood of Christ and eat the flesh of Christ. Loche got the pig bishop to bless the bodies of the sick and the dying and said, "Eat," to his people. So they stayed alive a bit longer, eating their own dead. Kyle swallowed the bitter taste that had come into his mouth. Look upon the table in the market square. You see the feast? Kyle did, but wished he had not. Entire skeletons of horses littered the flagstones of the square before the church, picked clean. Before the doors of the church a table was laid with bowls of reddish-brown liquid. Lifeless stick-like arms and legs were laid upon great steel platters. A scattering of empty coffins were built up in a pile beside the banqueting table. Now look to the next painting, The Martyring of Fools. The market square filled the entire canvas and was depicted in much greater detail, a dirty, rubbish-strewn space of wet stone in poor light. Either the painting was filthy with age, or dark greasy smoke had been deliberately conjured to drift across the area and stain the background. The flagstones were littered with the dead and the dying. Faceless figures in dark steel armour formed a border about the slaughter. Upon the long shields of the soldiers the thin red crosses looked wet, but the apex of the picture's image concentrated on a series of upright poles with things attached to their upper length. In the middle, upon the longest stave, you can see Loher, the father of lies. Around him, the 7. They were all stripped of their clothes. Their legs and their arms were smashed with poles while they are still alive. Then they get tied to the beams and raised vertically. Slow fires of dung, tow, and pitch are built under their feet. Kyle felt unwell, light-headed, and adjusted his feet. The floor of the room groaned beneath his boots. 9 thin black posts held dirty ruins of barely recognizable forms, engulfed in smoke. About the figures on the poles, others were strapped to wooden chairs with red fires beneath the seats. Yet more had been tied to and broken upon cartwheels raised on thin poles. The agonies of the blood friends were captured with white twists of face and sinewy throat, reaching upward to escape the fumes. Every figure yearned for the boiling black sky. 9. There are 9 posts. Peter smiled. Here burns the king, the 7 elders, and their bishop, the unholy swine. You see his feet? The last one on the right in the picture. Pig feet. The picture is dirty, but if you look closely you also see his vestments. They burn him in his holy robes and his bishop hat. Kyle chose not to look any closer. What happened to the others? The peasants? The people of the town? They were slaughtered in their homes. Few lived. The soldiers lied, said they would be saved if they ended the resistance. But they found most of the people too given over to Anabaptism to save, and alive with demons, so they cut their throats in their homes. Many were beheaded, hundreds, maybe 1,000. Who knows now? Their corpses were salted. The children and some women were sent to other towns in the diocese, but nearly all others died here on this last day of the siege. Verhulst was an educated man, and his parents had money. He survived because we think he bribed the Spanish mercenaries. Now, look at the sky. Tell me what is happening there. The sky seethed with a cumulus of pitch-black smoke, from which curious vanilla gases appeared in places, as if a sickly sun was trying to light the ground. A thin red fire glowed on the horizon. Kyle found his throat to be so dry he could barely speak. It's dark. Smoke, maybe, from the fires. Or a storm. The captain of the soldiers claimed a storm came on the final day, the last day. As they put the heretics to the sword, and as the town and the bodies burned to ashes, he said a terrible wind came up and started to scatter the bones. He said the air was full of smoke and embers, and they were forced to withdraw. What was left of Lorher and his chosen was meant for steel cages, to be taken around the nearby towns. The cages were to be hung from the steeples of churches as a warning, but the storm, it spoiled that, because when the wind blew in Saint Mayen on the last day, on the day of the false martyrs, a priest with the soldiers wrote that the sky filled up with ash, and then rained with black bones. All the soldiers ran when this happened. Now look above the walls, before the air is dark. What do you see? Birds. Peter nodded beside him. A score of black shapes, crows, seemed to hover lifelessly above the ruined walls. They'd been coming in for many weeks to eat the blessed dead, but on this day they got lost in the wind. It took them too. Took them into the sky with the remains of Lorher and his disciples. And now we come to the end of Verhulst's triptych, the Kingdom of Fools. Rising to the upper margin of the grey charred sky in the third painting, a single figure immediately captured Kyle's attention. The unholy swine. The pig clutched a sceptre in one uncomfortably prehensile trotter, and a gilt-edged book in another trotter. But what most unnerved him about the pig was its apparent glee at the elevation, or even levitation while seated in its throne. Up it went into the broiling maelstrom of the heavens, the air now depicted as an unpleasant sulphurous yellow mist. The pig and its host rose above the suggested miniature detail of a blackened town, crowned with smoke at the foot of the piece. Up into the sky the host of tormented and stricken martyrs writhed, thin, wretched forms of at least 100 naked human figures. The ghastly sky filled 2/3 of the picture, with its tainted air seeming to churn, circle, and pull at the earth far below. Birds who were still feeding on the listless human carrion of the air grinned as if delighted by their ghastly ascension, and were also whirlpooled into the sky. Bone-thin dogs with long snouts, lolling tongues, and prominent rib-cages rose upwards too, as if on their hind legs, and barked at the turmoil in the heavens about them. "You see the unholy swine?" Kyle nodded that he did. "He holds a book, the book of 100 chapters. It is Lorhe's hierophantic manifesto of the Blood Friends. A testament that deified him as immortal, and those who follow him as saints. A written proclamation of their divinity. Sister Catherine wrote something similar, and just as badly. She said it was transcribed through her. Maybe this was one thing she did not lie about. Now see the faces. Those around the pig are in better detail. Several of the faces were turned skywards in a mixture of wonderment and cruel leers. They think they are saved, but they are merely guests in damnation. Guests of those they served through Lorhe, these angels. The Blood Friends are consumed by this other place. Their souls are devoured. They become one with their angels, their false gods. They mimic the expressions of the Christian saints and martyrs. But this is an inversion. Now look in the top section of the picture, the final ascent into hell, through the sky. The top third of the picture depicted a long, miserable stretch of what looked like pale dirt, a shore before a great body of lifeless water, a place positioned above the maelstrom of sky that the martyrs moved upwards through. "We'll take 2 steps closer. Come." Kyle swallowed. "Up here, in hell. The Blood Friends frolic like blasphemous angels above the world. They cavort with the pig and a pack of mad dogs who stand on their hind legs. All their tongues flap to suggest idiocy. You see their simple crowns. All of the bone-thin figures were crowned like royalty in the featureless vacant space. The crowns were crudely made of wood. Here Verhulst represents Lohe and the Seven as kings of emptiness, of vapours and foul gases. Their constituency is a pestilence of sinners executed and burned alive, a flock of dead birds who feasted upon carrion, and dogs who have eaten diseased flesh. You can see the birds around the feet of the people. The birds, too, are bones. This is the paradise they were promised. The blood friends were even more wretchedly gaunt and spindly than they had been during the siege and the martyring. They didn't look like people any more, but the depiction was accurate. Kyle knew where he had seen such things before. Instead of heavenly bodies, they now are caged within twisted demoniac forms, human remains reshaped in the image of their masters. They can only masquerade as angels. They grin like fools upon the devastation wrought upon their earthly forms. You see, clutched in their hands are rags and bones. They clutch at ruin, but prize the things they have seized as if they are made of gold and are encrusted with precious jewels. In the middle you will see Lohe. He dances with the pig. Indeed he did. The horrible prance of a skeletal man who wore a wooden crown about a pig with grotesque human features under a bishop's headdress made Kyle feel sick and nervous. They are no longer men. They are the damned, devoured, yet still they yearn for the light below that burns them. They await here in the wasteland for a call from those old places where they were once strong, or from those who have come to adore them. Kyle turned away. The images had been seared into his memory. He knew he would revisit them, often. And as he walked across the room towards the door, unaccompanied by Peter, who had remained behind to hastily throw black sheets over the stands, all Kyle could see were the thin, wretched faces of the blood friends in their kingdom of fools. Their white eyes were full of madness.